The sound cut out on a Friday night in 1984 at a large outdoor arena, 11 minutes into a performance that 55,000 people had driven from 5 different states to see. One moment the music was there, full and loud and moving the way Michael Jackson's music moved when it was working correctly, when the band was locked in and the crowd had stopped thinking about anything except what was happening on stage. And then, without warning, the monitors went quiet, the PA died, and the only sound in the arena was the crowd realizing that something had gone wrong. Michael Jackson kept moving. This is the part that the people who were there, when they tell the story, always stop on. He had not been told. There was no earpiece click, no signal from the wings, no one walking out to explain. The music simply stopped existing, and Michael Jackson, who had been in the middle of a routine he had performed hundreds of times, continued performing it. Not out of confusion, not because he had not noticed. He noticed within seconds. Of course he noticed. He had been on stages since he was 5 years old. He understood what a stage sounded like when it was working and when it was not. He noticed, and he kept moving. And the crowd, which had begun to murmur and shift, stopped murmuring and watched. The technical failure that caused the outage was a common one for large outdoor productions in the early 1980s. A power surge in the main amplification trunk that fed both the monitors and the front-of-house PA. The production crew had a standard protocol for this situation. The estimate, from the moment of failure, was 12 to 15 minutes to restore full sound. In concert production terms, 12 to 15 minutes is a very long time. In the history of that particular tour, it would become the longest 12 minutes anyone in the building had ever experienced at a concert. Michael Jackson performed for all of it. Michael was in a specific phase of his career in 1984 that is difficult to describe precisely from the outside. Thriller had been released in December of 1982 and was, by the summer of 1984, still selling. Not coasting, not declining, but still building in the specific way that certain records build, slowly and permanently, until they have changed the landscape they arrived in. He was 25 years old. He had spent the first 20 years of his life on stages and in studios, and the specific combination of youth and experience that produced was something the industry had not encountered in exactly this form before. He understood performance, from the body, from 10,000 repetitions, from the specific knowledge that comes from having started at an age when the stage is not intimidating because there is not yet enough self-consciousness to be intimidated. He also understood failure, not personal failure, not artistic failure, but the technical failures of live performance, the things that go wrong in front of people and must be handled without the audience seeing the handling. A microphone that cuts out mid-lyric, a monitor that stops working so you can no longer hear yourself, a lighting cue that fires wrong, a costume piece that gives. In 10 years of touring with the Jackson 5 and then on his own, Michael had encountered every kind of technical failure that live performance produces. He had a specific approach to all of them, developed through repetition and necessity. You keep moving. You keep performing. You do not show the audience the problem, because the moment you show them the problem becomes the show. What happened on that Friday night was not the kind of small technical failure he had learned to handle invisibly. This was the entire PA system going down. Not a monitor, not a microphone, but the complete sound infrastructure of a 55,000-person arena disappearing simultaneously. There was no invisible handling of this. The crowd heard the silence. The band stopped. The stage was not broken. It was simply, suddenly, quiet. He kept moving. The concert was part of the Victory Tour, the 1984 reunion of the Jackson 5, as 6 brothers performing together for the first time in years. The Victory Tour was one of the most anticipated events in American popular music that year, and also one of the most scrutinized. The ticket prices had generated significant controversy in the months before the shows began. The staging was on a scale that outdoor pop concerts had rarely attempted before. The production was enormous. The lighting rigs alone required 3 full trucks. The stage itself was one of the largest mobile structures that American concert production had yet built. And with enormous production came the specific vulnerability of anything that depended on a large number of interconnected systems functioning simultaneously. The production company had run through the failure protocols in technical rehearsal. They knew what to do when something went wrong. They did not anticipate what the person on the stage would do. The Friday night show was the 3rd date of the run. The first 2 nights had been technically clean. By the 3rd night, the production crew had developed the particular confidence that comes from 2 successful shows, the confidence that is sometimes in live production the thing that precedes a problem. He performed the choreography that the 55,000 people in the arena had come to see, the routines they had watched in the music videos, that they had practiced in their living rooms, that they had been anticipating for the 3 months they had been waiting for tickets. He performed it without the music, and the crowd, which had been preparing to leave or to wait impatiently for the technical problem to be resolved, did not leave and did not become impatient. It watched. In growing quiet, the arena went from the noise of disruption to something else, something that people who experienced it described in terms that were difficult to coordinate, because none of them had quite the right language for what they had seen. One woman who had been in the lower section with her daughter described it as a dancer performing for themselves, that the absence of the music had removed, somehow, the mediation between the performer and the audience, had taken away the apparatus that usually stood between them, and left only the movement and the people watching it. She said it felt private, even in a crowd of 55,000. She said her daughter, who was 8 years old, did not speak or move for the entire 13 minutes. She just watched. The stage manager, watching from the wings, had begun to move toward the stage entrance when he realized what was happening. He stopped. He watched. He would say later that he stopped because there was nothing to fix, because Michael had already made the decision that the show was continuing, and walking out would have been an interruption, not an assistance. He stayed in the wings for all 13 minutes. He did not move toward the stage again. The failure happened during "Don't Stop Till You Get Enough." The song was 11 minutes into the extended live arrangement when the sound died. Michael was mid-phrase. He did not finish the phrase into a working microphone. He finished it anyway, into the silence, and continued. What he did in the next 12 minutes became, among the people who watched it from close enough, one of the more discussed aspects of the 1984 tour. Not in newspapers, not in the formal record of the performances, but in the specific way that concert-goers described things they witnessed that they could not quite account for afterward. He performed in complete silence. No monitors in his ears, no PA in the crowd, no music from the band, because the band, understanding what had happened, had stopped playing. The stage was lit by the lighting rig, which continued on its programmed sequence, and Michael Jackson, under those lights, without music, continued to move. The sound came back at the 13-minute mark, slightly ahead of the crew's estimate. The band came in, the music restarted. The crowd, which had been so quiet you could hear the lighting rigs humming, erupted in a way that surprised even the production crew who had been expecting the response. Not the polite eruption of relief that follows a technical problem being fixed. Something larger than that. Something that had been building for 13 minutes in a quiet arena while 55,000 people watched a performer prove, without the benefit of amplification, that the performance did not require the amplification. Michael Jackson took a breath when the monitors came back up. He took one step to adjust his position on the stage, and then he continued from exactly where the song had been when the sound cut out. As if the 13 minutes had not happened. As if the thread had never been dropped. The people in the arena understood that they had seen something. Not everyone could say precisely what. But the crowd that left that night had not had the experience they had come for. The experience of a large, technically perfect pop concert. They had had something different. Something that most of them could not entirely articulate, but that they carried with them in the specific way you carry things you witness and cannot quite explain. A man who had been in the production crew, not the sound crew, a lighting technician who had worked on 12 major tours, said he had seen performers handle technical failures in every possible way. He had seen them freeze. He had seen them turn to the wings in panic. He had seen them make jokes that did not land and then stand on a broken stage waiting for the crew to fix things while the audience grew impatient. He had seen very experienced performers simply stop and wait, which is what most experienced performers do when a show is fully broken. He said he had never, in 12 years and hundreds of shows, seen a performer continue performing in a way that made the failure irrelevant, that made the show simply continue at full force in the absence of everything the show technically required. He said, Michael didn't need it. That was what he understood, watching from the lighting board. Michael Jackson, without a PA, without monitors, without music, was still performing the show. The apparatus was gone, and the performance was still there. The production crew got the PA fixed. The rest of the show ran clean. The reviews the next day mentioned the technical failure as a note, a problem that had been resolved, and moved on. None of the reviews described what had happened during those 13 minutes. The journalists who covered the show had not been close enough to fully register what the crowd had been watching while the crew worked. None of them wrote about the specific silence that had settled over 55,000 people, or what had held them in that silence. The people who were there did not need a review to tell them. They had watched a performer who had spent his entire life learning to work with lights and sound and production and band and crowd discover, in front of 55,000 people, that he did not need any of it. In the years that followed, as Michael Jackson's career continued at a level that almost nothing in the history of popular music had reached before, the people who had been in that arena would sometimes describe it, quietly, to people close to them, in the specific way you describe things that you saw, but that did not quite fit into the ordinary categories of what you can describe. They did not call it the show. They called it the 13 minutes. They said, you had to be there. They said, I don't know if anyone who wasn't in the room would understand. What Michael Jackson understood, in the specific way that a performer who has been on stages since childhood understands things, was that the relationship between a performer and an audience does not require a PA system. It requires only the irreducible thing, the movement, the presence, the specific quality of attention that a great performer gives to the people in front of them. Everything else All the amplification and production and technical infrastructure that surrounds a modern concert exists to extend that thing across a larger space. When the extension fails, the thing itself remains. On a Friday night in 1984, in a quiet arena with a broken sound system and 55,000 people holding their breath, Michael Jackson proved it. The sound was gone. The show went on. That was the night 55,000 people discovered that the sound and the show were not the same thing, and that the person at the center of the show had known this, at some level, for his entire life.